A Guide to Health by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, translated by A. Rama Iyer. Translator's Note. In these days, when the name of Mahatma Gandhi is identified with the momentous question of non-cooperation, it may come with a shock of surprise to most readers to be told that he is something of an authority on matters of health and disease as well. Very few of us perhaps are aware that he is the author of quite an original little health book in Gujarati. Those who think of him as a dreamy idealist or an unpractical visionary with his head always in the clouds will certainly be undeceived when they read this book replete from cover to cover with practical observations on the most practical question of health. His views are, of course, radically different from the ordinary views that find expression in the pages of such books. In many cases, indeed, his doctrines must be pronounced revolutionary, and will doubtless be regarded by a certain class of readers as wholly impracticable. Even the most revolutionary of his doctrines, however, are based not on the shifting quicksands of mere theory, but on the solid foundation of deep study, backed up by personal experience of nearly 30 years. He himself recognizes that many of his views will hardly be accepted by the ordinary reader, but he has felt himself impelled by a stern sense of duty to give publicity to his convictions, formed after so much of study and experience. Some at least, however, of those who read his book cannot help being profoundly influenced by it. Such, at any rate, has been the case with me, and I have ventured to translate the book into English in the hope that others may also be benefited likewise. I should perhaps explain that I am not a student of Gujarati, the language of the original. I have used instead one of two Hindi versions of the book. I should also point out that I have not attempted a literal or close translation, but only a very free rendering into English. In some cases, whole passages have been omitted, and occasionally only the general sense of a passage has been given. It is hoped, however, that in no single instance has there been a misinterpretation of the original words. I am aware that many errors might have crept in, as the translation had to be done in a hurry, and there was hardly any time for revision. I hope to make a thorough revision of the book in case a second edition is called for. National College, Trichinopoly, July 1921. A. Rama Iyer. Introduction. For more than 20 years past, I have been paying special attention to the question of health. While in England, I had to make my own arrangements for food and drink, and I can say, therefore, that my experience is quite reliable. I have arrived at certain definite conclusions from that experience, and I now set them down for the benefit of my readers. As the familiar saying goes, prevention is better than cure. It is far easier and safer to prevent illness by the observance of the laws of health than to set about curing the illness which has been brought on by our own ignorance and carelessness. Hence it is the duty of all thoughtful men to understand aright the laws of health, and the object of the following pages is to give an account of these laws. We shall also consider the best methods of cure for some of the most common diseases. As Milton says, the mind can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell, and so heaven is not somewhere above the clouds and hell somewhere underneath the earth. We have the same idea expressed in the Sanskrit saying, Mana eva mayushayanam kararam bandha moksheo. Man's captivity or freedom is dependent on the state of his mind. From this it follows that whether a man is healthy or unhealthy depends on himself. Illness is the result not only of our actions, but also of our thoughts. As has been said by a famous doctor, more people die for fear of diseases like smallpox, cholera, and plague than out of those diseases themselves. Ignorance is one of the root causes of disease. Very often we get bewildered at the most ordinary diseases out of sheer ignorance, and in our anxiety to get better, we simply make matters worse. Our ignorance of the most elementary laws of health leads us to adopt wrong remedies or drives us into the hands of the veriest quacks. How strange, and yet how true, it is that we know much less about things near at hand than things at a distance. We know hardly anything of our own village, but we can give by rote the names of the rivers and mountains of England. We take so much trouble to learn the names of the stars in the sky, while we hardly think it worth while to know the things that are in our own homes. We never care a jot for the splendid pageantry of nature before our very eyes, while we are so anxious to witness the puerile mummeries of the theatre. And in the same way we are not ashamed to be ignorant of the structure of our body, of the way in which the bones and muscles grow, how the blood circulates and is rendered impure, how we are affected by evil thoughts and passions, how our mind travels over illimitable spaces and times while the body is at rest, and so on. There is nothing so closely connected with us as our body, but there is also nothing perhaps of which our ignorance is so profound or our indifference so complete. It is the duty of every one of us to get over this indifference. Every one should regard it as his bounden duty to know something of the fundamental facts concerning his body. This kind of instruction should indeed be made compulsory in our schools. At present, we know not how to deal with the most ordinary scalds and wounds. We are helpless if a thorn runs into our foot. We are beside ourselves with fright and dismay if we are bitten by an ordinary snake. Indeed, if we consider the depth of our ignorance in such matters, we shall have to hang down our heads in shame. To assert that the average man cannot be expected to know these things is simply absurd. The following pages are intended for such as are willing to learn. I do not pretend that the facts mentioned by me have not been said before, but my readers will find here in a nutshell the substance of several books on the subject. I have arrived at my conclusions after studying these books and after a series of careful experiments. Moreover, those who are new to this subject will also be saved the risk of being confounded by the conflicting views held by the writers of such books. One writer says, for instance, that hot water is to be used under certain circumstances, while another writer says that exactly under the same circumstances cold water is to be used. Conflicting views of this kind have been carefully considered by me, so that my readers may rest assured of the reliability of my own views. We have got into the habit of calling in a doctor for the most trivial diseases. Where there is no regular doctor available, we take the advice of mere quacks. We labor under the fatal delusion that no disease can be cured without medicine. This has been responsible for more mischief to mankind than any other evil. It is, of course, necessary that our diseases should be cured, but they cannot be cured by medicines. Not only are medicines merely useless, but at times even positively harmful. For a diseased man to take drugs and medicines would be as foolish as to try to cover up the filth that has accumulated in the inside of the house. The more we cover up the filth, the more rapidly does the putrefaction go on. The same is the case with the human body. Illness or disease is only nature's warning that filth has accumulated in some portion or another of the body, and it would surely be the part of wisdom to allow nature to remove the filth instead of covering it up by the help of medicines. Those who take medicines are really rendering the task of nature doubly difficult. It is, on the other hand, quite easy for us to help nature in her task by remembering certain elementary principles, by fasting, for instance, so that the filth may not accumulate all the more, and by vigorous exercise in the open air, so that some of the filth may escape in the form of perspiration. And the one thing that is supremely necessary is to keep our minds strictly under control. We find from experience that when once a bottle of medicine gets itself introduced into a home, It never thinks of going out, but only goes on drawing other bottles in its train. We come across numberless human beings who are afflicted by some disease or other, all through their lives, in spite of the pathetic devotion to medicines. They are today under the treatment of this doctor, tomorrow of that. They spend all their life in a futile search after a doctor who will cure them for good. As the late Justice Stephen, who was for some time in India, said, "It is really astonishing that drugs of which so little is known should be applied by doctors to bodies of which they know still less." Some of the greatest doctors of the West themselves have now come to hold this view. Sir Astley Cooper, for instance, admits that the science of medicine is mostly mere guesswork. Dr. Baker and Dr. Frank hold that more people die of medicines than of diseases, and Dr. Mason Good even goes to the extent of saying that more men have fallen victims to medicine than to war, famine, and pestilence combined. It is also a matter of experience that diseases increase in proportion to the increase in the number of doctors in a place. The demand for drugs has become so widespread that even the meanest papers are sure of getting advertisements of quack medicines, if of nothing else. In a recent book on the patent medicines, we are told that the fruit salts and syrups for which we pay from 2 to 5 rupees cost to their manufacturers only from a quarter of an anna to 1 anna. No wonder then that their compositions should be so scrupulously kept a secret. We will therefore assure our readers that there is absolutely no necessity for them to seek the aid of doctors. To those, however, who may not be willing to boycott doctors and medicines altogether, we will say, as far as possible, possess your souls in patience, and do not trouble the doctors. In case you are forced at length to call in the aid of a doctor, be sure to get a good man. Then follow his directions strictly, and do not call in another doctor unless by his own advice. But remember, above all, that the curing of your disease does not rest ultimately in the hands of any doctor. M.K. Gandhi. End of translator's note and introduction.
Part 1. Guide to Health. Chapter 1. The Meaning of Health. Ordinarily, that man is considered healthy who eats well and moves about, and does not resort to a doctor. But a little thought will convince us that this idea is wrong. There are many cases of men being diseased in spite of their eating well and freely moving about. They are under the delusion that they are healthy simply because they are too indifferent to think about the matter. In fact, perfectly healthy men hardly exist anywhere over this wide world. As has been said, only that man can be said to be really healthy who has a sound mind and a sound body. The relation between the body and the mind is so intimate that, if either of them got out of order, the whole system would suffer. Let us take the analogy of the rose flower. Its color stands to its fragrance in the same way as the body to the mind or the soul. No one regards an artificial paper flower as a sufficient substitute for the natural flower, for the obvious reason that the fragrance which forms the essence of the flower cannot be reproduced. So, too, we instinctively honor the man of a pure mind and a noble character in preference to the man who is merely physically strong. Of course, the body and the soul are both essential, but the latter is far more important than the former. No man whose character is not pure can be said to be really healthy. The body which contains a diseased mind can never be anything but diseased. Hence, it follows that a pure character is the foundation of health in the real sense of the term, and we may say that all evil thoughts and evil passions are but different forms of disease. Thus considered, we may conclude that that man alone is perfectly healthy, whose body is well formed, whose teeth as well as eyes and ears are in good condition, whose nose is free from dirty matter, whose skin exudes perspiration freely and without any bad smell, whose mouth is also free from bad smells, whose hands and legs perform their duty properly, who is neither too fat nor too thin, and whose mind and senses are constantly under his control. As has already been said, it is very hard to gain such health, but it is harder still to retain it when once it has been acquired. The chief reason why we are not truly healthy is that our parents were not. An eminent writer has said that, if the parents are in perfectly good condition, their children would certainly be superior to them in all respects. A perfectly healthy man has no reason to fear death. Our terrible fear of death shows that we are far from being so healthy. It is, however, the clear duty of all of us to strive for perfect health. We will therefore proceed to consider in the following pages how such health can be attained, and how, when once attained, it can also be retained forever. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of A Guide to Health. The Human Body. The world is compounded of the 5 elements: earth, water, air, fire, and ether. So too is our body. It is a sort of miniature world, hence the body stands in need of all the elements in due proportion: pure earth, pure water, pure fire or sunlight, pure air, and open space. When any one of these falls short of its due proportion, illness is caused in the body. The body is made up of skin and bone, as well as flesh and blood. The bones constitute the framework of the body, but for them we could not stand erect and move about. They protect the softer parts of the body. Thus the skull gives protection to the brain, while the ribs protect the heart and the lungs. Doctors have counted 238 bones in the human body. The outside of the bones is hard, but the inside is soft and hollow. When there is a joint between 2 bones, there is a coating of marrow, which may be regarded as a soft bone. The teeth, too, are to be counted among the bones. When we feel the flesh at some points, we find it to be tough and elastic. This part of the flesh is known as the muscle. It is the muscles that enable us to fold and unfold our arms, to move our jaws, and to close our eyes. It is by means of the muscles again that our organs of perception do their work. It is beyond the province of this book to give a detailed account of the structure of the body, nor has the present writer enough knowledge to give such an account. We will, therefore, content ourselves with just as much information as is essential for our present purpose. The most important portion of the body is the stomach. If the stomach ceases to work even for a single moment, the whole body would collapse. The work of the stomach is to digest the food, and so to provide nourishment to the body. Its relation to the body is the same as that of the steam engine to the railway train. The gastric juice, which is produced in the stomach, helps the assimilation of nutritious elements in the food, the refuse being sent out by the way of intestines in the form of urine and feces. On the left side of the abdominal cavity is the spleen, while to the right of the stomach is the liver, whose function is the purification of the blood and the secretion of the bile, which is so useful for digestion. In the hollow space enclosed by the ribs are situated the heart and the lungs. The heart is between 2 lungs, but more to the left than the right. There are on the whole 24 bones in the chest. The action of the heart can be felt between the 5th and 6th rib. The lungs are connected with the windpipe. The air which we inhale is taken into the lungs through the windpipe, and the blood is purified by it. It is of the utmost importance to breathe through the nose instead of through the mouth. On the circulation of the blood depend all activities of the body. It is the blood that provides nourishment to the body. It extracts the nutritious elements out of the food and ejects the refuse through the intestines, and so keeps the body warm. The blood is incessantly circulating all over the body along the veins and the arteries. The beatings of the pulse are due to the circulation of the blood. The pulse of a normal adult man beats some 70 times a minute. The pulse of children beat faster, while those of old men are slower. The chief agency for keeping the blood pure is the air. When the blood returns to the lungs after one complete round over the body, it is impure and contains poisonous elements. The oxygen of the air, which we inhale, purifies this blood and is assimilated into it. while the nitrogen absorbs the poisonous matter and is breathed out. This process goes on incessantly. As the air has a very important function to perform in the body, we shall devote a separate chapter to a detailed consideration of the same. End of Chapter 2.
Part 1, Chapter 3 of A Guide to Health. Air. Of the three things that are indispensable for the subsistence of man, namely air, water, and food, the first is the most important. Hence it is that God has created it in such large quantities as to make it available to all of us for nothing. Modern civilization, however, has rendered even fresh air somewhat costly, or in order to breathe fresh air, we have to go out of towns, and this means expense. The residents of Bombay, for instance, distinctly improve in health in the air of Mathuran, or still better, of the Malabar Hills. But they cannot go to these places without money. Hence, in these days, it would hardly be true to say that we get fresh air gratis, as we used to in the old days. But whether fresh air is available gratis or not, it is undeniable that we cannot get on without it. We've already seen that the blood circulates over the body, returns to the lungs, and after being purified, starts its round again. We breathe out the impure air, and take in oxygen from the outside, which purifies the blood. This process of inspiration and expiration goes on forever, and on it depends man's life. When drowned in water, we die, because then we are unable to let the impure air in the body and take in pure air from outside. The divers go down into the water in what is known as a diving bell, and they take in fresh air through a tube which leads to the top. Hence it is they are able to remain under water for a long time. It has been ascertained by experiments that no man can live without air for as long as 5 minutes. We often hear of the death of little children when they are held so close to the bosom by ignorant mothers as to make it impossible for them to breathe. We should all be as much against the breathing of impure air as we are against the drinking of dirty water and the eating of dirty food. But the air we breathe in is, as a rule, far more impure than the water we drink or the food we eat. We are all worshippers of concrete objects. Those things that can be seen and felt are regarded by us as of far greater importance than those which are invisible and intangible. Since air belongs to this latter class of objects, we fail to realize the evil wrought by the impure air that we breathe. We would think twice before eating the leavings of another man's food, or drinking out of a cup polluted by another man's lips. Even those who have not the least sense of shame or repugnance would never eat another man's vomit, or drink the water which has been spat out by him. Even those who are dying of hunger and thirst would refuse to do that. But alas, how few of us realize that the air we inhale is so often the impure and poisonous air which has been exhaled by others, and which is surely no less objectionable than a man's vomit. How strange that men should sit and sleep together for hours in closed rooms, and go on inhaling the deadly air exhaled by themselves and their companions. How fortunate for man that air should be so light and diffusive, and capable of penetrating the smallest holes. Even when the doors and windows are closed, there is generally some little space between the walls and the roof, through which some air from outside manages to get in, so that the inmates of the room have not to breathe exclusively poisoned air. The air that we exhale mixes with the air outside and is rendered pure again by an automatic process that is always going on in nature. Now we are able to understand why so many men and women should be weak and diseased. There can be absolutely no doubt that impure air is the root cause of disease in 99 cases out of every 100. It follows that the best way of avoiding disease is to live and work in the open air. No doctor can compete with fresh air in this matter. Consumption is caused by the decay of the lungs due to the inhaling of impure air, just as a steam engine which is filled with bad coal gets out of order. Hence, doctors say that the easiest and the most effective treatment for a consumptive patient is to keep him in fresh air for all the 24 hours of the day. It is, of course, essential to know how we can keep the air pure. In fact, every child should be taught this, the value of fresh air, as soon as it is able to understand anything. If my readers would take the trouble to learn the simple facts about the air, and would put their knowledge into practice, while teaching their children also to do the same, I shall feel immensely gratified. Our latrines are perhaps most responsible for rendering the air impure. Very few people realize the serious harm done by dirty latrines. Even dogs and cats make with their claws something like a pit wherein to deposit their feces, and then cover it up with some earth. Where there are no lavatories of the modern approved types, we should also do likewise. There should also be kept ashes or dry earth in a tin can or an earthen vessel inside the latrine, and whoever goes into the latrine should, on coming out, cover the feces well with the ash or the earth, as the case may be. If this is done, there would be no bad smell, and the flies, too, will not settle on it and transmit the filth. Anybody whose sense of smell has not been wholly blunted, or who has not grown thoroughly accustomed to foul smells, will know how noxious is the smell that emanates from all filthy matter which is allowed to lie open to the weather. Our gorge rises at the very thought of feces being mixed with our food, but we go on inhaling the air which has been polluted by such foul smell, forgetting the fact that the one is just as bad as the other, except that, while the former is visible, the latter is not. We should see that our latrines are kept thoroughly neat and clean. We abhor the idea of cleaning the latrines ourselves, but what we should really abhor is the idea of making use of dirty latrines. What is the harm in ourselves removing the filth which has been expelled from inside our own body, and which we are not ashamed to have removed by others? There is absolutely no reason why we should not ourselves learn the work of scavenging and teach it to our children as well. The filthy matter should be removed and thrown into a pit 2 feet deep, and then covered up with a thick layer of earth. If we go to some open place, we should dig a small pit with our hands or feet, and then cover it up after the bowels have been evacuated. We also make the air impure by making water at all places indiscriminately. This dirty habit should be given up altogether. If there is no place specially set apart for the purpose, we should go to some dry ground away from the house, and should also cover up the urine with earth. The filth should not be cast into very deep pits, for in that case it would be beyond the reach of sun's heat, and would also pollute the water flowing underneath the earth. The habit of spitting indiscriminately on the verandas, courtyards, and such like places is also very bad. The spittle, especially of consumptives, is very dangerous. The poisonous germs in it rise into the air, and being inhaled by others, lead to a spread of the disease. We should keep a spittoon inside the house, and if we have to spit when out on the road, we should spit where there is dry dust, so that the spittle may be absorbed into the dust and cause no harm. Doctors hold that the consumptive should spit into a spittoon with some disinfectant in it, or even if he spits on dry ground, the germs in his spittle manage to rise and even spread into the air along with the dust. But in any case, there can be no doubt that the habit of spitting wherever we please is dirty as well as dangerous. Some people throw where they like cooked food and other articles which decay and render the air impure. If all such rubbish be put underground, the air would not be made impure, and good manure, too, could be obtained, In fact, no kind of decaying matter should be allowed to lie exposed to the air. It is so easy for us to take this necessary precaution if only we are earnest about it. Now we have seen how our own bad habits render the air impure, and what we can do to keep it pure. Next we shall consider how to inhale the air. As already mentioned in the last chapter, the air is to be inhaled through the nose and not through the mouth. There are, however, very few persons who know how to breathe correctly. Many people are in the pernicious habit of inhaling through the mouth. If very cold air is inhaled through the mouth, we catch cold and sore throat. Further, if we inhale through the mouth, the particles of dust in the air go into the lungs and cause great mischief. In London, for instance, in November, the smoke which issues from the chimneys of great factories mixes with the dense fog, producing a kind of yellow mixture. This contains tiny particles of soot, which can be detected in the spittle of a man who inhales through the mouth. To escape this, many women, who have not learned to breathe through the nose alone, put on a special kind of veil over their faces, which act as sieves. If these veils are closely examined, particles of dust can be detected in them. But God has given to all of us a sieve of this kind inside the nose. The air which is inhaled through the nostrils is sifted before it reaches the lungs, and is also warmed in the process. So all men should learn to breathe through the nose alone, and this is not at all difficult, if we remember to keep our mouth firmly shut at all times, except when we are talking. Those who have got into the habit of keeping their mouths open should sleep with a bandage round the mouth, which would force them to breathe through the nose. They should also take some 20 long respirations in the open air, both in the morning and in the evening. In fact, all men can practice this simple exercise and see for themselves how rapidly their chest deepens. If the chest be measured at the beginning of the practice, and again after an interval of 2 months, it will be seen how much it has expanded in this short period. After learning how to inhale the air, we should cultivate the habit of breathing fresh air day in and day out. We are generally in the most pernicious habit of keeping confined to the house or the office throughout the day, and sleeping in narrow rooms at night, with all doors and windows shut. As far as possible, we should remain in the open air at all times. We should at least sleep on the veranda or in the open air. Those who cannot do this should at least keep the doors and windows of the room fully open at all times. The air is our food for all the 24 hours of the day. Why then should we be afraid of it? It is a most foolish idea that we catch cold by inhaling the cool breeze of the morning. Of course, those people who have spoiled their lungs by the evil habit of sleeping within closed doors are likely to catch cold if they change their habit all on a sudden. But even they should not be afraid of cold, for this cold can be speedily got rid of. Nowadays in Europe, the houses for consumptives are being built in such a way that they may get fresh air at all times. We know what terrible havoc is wrought in India by epidemics. We should remember that these epidemics are due to our habit of defiling the air and of inhaling this poisonous air. We should understand that even the most delicate people will be benefited by systematically inhaling fresh air. If we cultivate the habit of keeping the air pure and of breathing only fresh air, we can save ourselves from many a terrible disease. Sleeping with the face uncovered is as essential as sleeping in fresh air. Many of our people are in the habit of sleeping with the face covered, which means that they have to inhale the poisonous air which has been exhaled by themselves. Fortunately, however, some of the air from outside does find its way through the interstices of the cloth, else they should die of suffocation. But the small quantity of air that gains entrance in this way is altogether inadequate. If we are suffering from cold, we may cover the head with a piece of cloth or put on a nightcap, but the nose should be kept exposed under all circumstances. Air and light are so intimately connected with each other that it is as well to speak a few words here on the value of light. Light is as indispensable to life as air itself. Hence it is that hell is represented as completely dark. Where light cannot penetrate, the air can never be pure. If we enter a dark cellar, we can distinctly perceive the smell of the foul air. The fact that we cannot see in the dark shows that God has intended for us to live and move in the light, and nature has given us just as much darkness as we require in the night. And yet many people are in the habit of sitting or sleeping in underground cellars devoid of air and light, even in the hottest summer. Those who thus deprive themselves of air and light are always weak and haggard. Nowadays there are many doctors in Europe who cure their patients by means of air bath and sun bath alone. Thousands of diseased persons have been cured by mere exposure to the air and to the sunlight. We should keep all doors and windows in our houses always open in order to allow the free entrance of air and light. Some readers may ask why, if air and light are so indispensable, those who live and work in cellars are not visibly affected. Those who have thought well over the matter would never put this question. Our aim should be to attain the maximum of health by all legitimate means. We should not be content merely to live anyhow. It has been indubitably established that insufficient air and light give rise to disease. Dwellers in towns are, as a rule, more delicate than those in the country, for they get less air and light than the latter. Air and light, then, are absolutely indispensable to health, and everyone should remember all that we have said on the matter and act up to it to the best of his ability. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4, A Guide to Health. Water. As has been already pointed out, air is the most indispensable to our subsistence, while water comes next in order. Man cannot live for more than a few minutes without air, but he can live for a few days without water. And in the absence of other food, he can subsist on water alone for many days. There is more than 70% of water in the composition of our foodstuffs, as in that of the human body. Even though water is so indispensable, we take hardly any pains to keep it pure. Epidemics are as much the outcome of our indifference to the quality of the water we drink, as of the air we breathe. The drinking of dirty water very often produces, also, the disease of the stone. Water may be impure in either of two ways, by issuing from dirty places, or by being defiled by us. Where the water issues from dirty places, we should not drink it at all, nor do we generally drink it, but we do not shrink from drinking the water which has been defiled by ourselves. River water, for instance, is regarded as quite good for drinking, although we throw in all sorts of rubbish, and also use it for washing purposes. We should make it a rule never to drink the water in which people bathe. The upper portion of a river should be set apart for drinking water, the lower being reserved for bathing and washing purposes. Where there is no such arrangement, it is a good practice to dig in the sand, and take drinking water therefrom. This water is very pure, since it has been filtered by passage through the sand. It is generally risky to drink well water, for unless it is well protected, the dirty water at the top would trickle down into the well, and render the water impure. Further, birds and insects often fall into the water and die. Sometimes birds build their nests inside the wells, and the dirt from the feet of those who draw water from the well is also washed down into the water. For all these reasons, we should be particularly careful in drinking well water. Water kept in tubs is also very often impure. If it should be purer, the tub should be washed clean at frequent intervals, and should be kept covered. We should also see that the tank or well from which the water is taken is kept in good condition. Very few people, however, take such precautions to keep the water pure. Hence, the best way of removing the impurities of the water is to boil it well, and after cooling it, filter it carefully into another vessel through a thick and clean piece of cloth. Our duty, however, does not end with this. We should realize that we owe a duty to our fellow men in this matter. We should see to it that we do absolutely nothing to defile the water which is used for drinking by the public. We should scrupulously refrain from bathing or washing in the water which is reserved for drinking. We should never answer the calls of nature near the banks of a river, nor cremate the dead bodies there and throw the ashes after cremation into the water. In spite of all the care that we may take, we find it so difficult to keep water perfectly pure. It may have, for instance, salt dissolved in it, or bits of grass and other decaying matter. Rainwater is, of course, the purest, but before it reaches us, it generally becomes impure by the absorption of the floating matter in the atmosphere. Perfectly pure water has a most beneficial effect on the system. Hence, doctors administer distilled water to their patients. Those who are suffering from constipation are appreciably benefited by the use of distilled water. Many people do not know that water is of two kinds, soft and hard. Hard water is water in which some kind of salt has been dissolved. Hence, soap does not readily lather in it, and food cannot be easily boiled in it. The taste is brackish, while soft water tastes sweet. It is much safer to drink soft water, although some people hold that hard water is better by virtue of the presence of nutritious matter dissolved therein. Rainwater is the best kind of soft water, and is therefore the best for drinking purposes. Hard water, if boiled or kept over the fire for some half an hour, is rendered soft. Then it may be filtered and drunk. The question is often asked, when should one drink water, and how much? The only safe answer to this is this: one should drink water only when one feels thirsty, and even then, just enough to quench the thirst. There is no harm in drinking water during the meals or immediately afterwards. Of course, we should not wash the food down with water. If the food refuses to go down of itself, it means that either it has not been well prepared or the stomach is not in need of it. Ordinarily, there is no need to drink water, and indeed there should be none. As already mentioned, there is a large percentage of water in our ordinary articles of food, and we also add water in cooking them. Why, then, should we feel thirsty? Those people whose diet is free from such articles as chilies and onions, which create an artificial thirst, have rarely any need to drink water. Those who feel unaccountably thirsty must be suffering from some disease or other. We may be tempted to drink any kind of water that we come across, simply because we see some people doing it with impunity. The reply to this has already been given in connection with air. Our blood has in itself the power of destroying many of the poisonous elements that enter into it, but it has to be renewed and purified, just as the sharp edge of a sword has to be mended when it has once been employed in action. Hence, if we go on drinking impure water, we should not be surprised to find our blood thoroughly poisoned in the end. End of Chapter 4.
Part 1, Chapter 5 of A Guide to Health. Food. It is impossible to lay down hard and fast rules in the matter of food. What sort of food should we eat, how much of it should be eaten, and at what times? These are questions on which doctors differ a great deal. The ways of men are so diverse that the very same food shows different effects on different individuals. Although, however, it is impossible to say conclusively what sort of food we should eat, it is the clear duty of every individual to bestow serious thought on the matter. Needless to say, the body cannot subsist without food. We undergo all sorts of sufferings and privations for the sake of food. But at the same time, it is indisputable that 99.9% of men and women in the world eat merely to please the palate. They never pause to think of the after effects at the time of eating. Many people take purgatives and digestive pills or powders in order to be able to eat thoroughly well. Then there are some people who, after eating to the utmost of their capacity, vomit out all that they have eaten and proceed to eat the same stuffs once more. Some people, indeed, eat so sumptuously that for 2 or 3 days together they do not feel hungry at all. In some cases, men have even been known to have died of overeating. I say all this from my own experience. When I think of my old days, I am tempted to laugh at many things and cannot help being ashamed of some things. In those days, I used to have tea in the morning, breakfast 2 or 3 hours afterwards, dinner at 1 o'clock, tea again at 3 p.m., and supper between 6 and 7. My condition at that time was most pitiable. There was a great deal of superfluous fat on my body, and bottles of medicine were always at hand. In order to be able to eat well, I used to take purgatives very often, as well as some tonic or other. In those days, I had not a third of my present capacity for work, in spite of the fact that I was then in the prime of youth. Such a life is surely pitiable, and if we consider the matter seriously, we must also admit to be mean, sinful, and thoroughly contemptible. Man is not born to eat, nor should he live to eat. His true function is to know and serve his maker. But since the body is essential to this service, we have perforce to eat. Even atheists will admit that we should eat merely to preserve our health and not more than is needed for this purpose. Turn to the birds and beasts, and what do you find? They never eat merely to please the palate. They never go on eating till their inside is full to overflowing. On the other hand, they eat only to appease their hunger, and even then only just as much as will appease their hunger. They take the food provided by nature and do not cook their food. Can it be that man alone is created to worship the palate? Can it be that he alone is destined to be eternally suffering from disease? Those animals that live a natural life of freedom never once die of hunger. Among them there are no distinctions of rich and poor, of those who eat many times a day and those who do not get even one meal in the day. These abnormalities are found only among us human beings, and yet we regard ourselves as superior to the animal creation. Surely those who spend their days in the worship of their stomach are worse than the birds and beasts. A calm reflection will show that all sins like lying, cheating and stealing are ultimately due to a subjection to the palate. He who is able to control the palate will easily be able to control the other senses. If we tell lies or commit theft or adultery, we are looked down upon by society, but strangely enough, no odium attaches to those who slavishly pander to the palate. It would seem as though this were not a question of morality at all. The fact is that even the best of us are slaves to the palate. No one has yet adequately emphasized the numberless evils that arise from a habit of pandering to the palate. All civilized people would boycott the company of liars, thieves and adulterers, but they go on eating beyond all limits, and never regard it as a sin at all. Pandering to the palate is not regarded by us as a sin, since all of us are guilty of it, just as dacoity is not regarded as a crime in a village of dacoits. But what is worse, we pride ourselves on it. On occasions of marriage and other festivities, we regard it as a sacred duty to worship the palate. Even in times of funeral, we are not ashamed of doing it. Has a guest come, we must gorge him with sweetmeats. If from time to time we do not give feasts to our friends and relations, or do not partake of the feasts given by them, we must become objects of contempt. If, having invited our friends to eat with us, we fail to cram them with rich stuffs, we must be regarded as miserly. On holidays, of course, we must have specially rich food prepared. Indeed, what is really a great sin has come to be looked upon as a sign of wisdom. We have sedulously cultivated such false notions in the matter of eating that we never realize our slavishness and our beastliness. How can we save ourselves from this terrible state? Let us view the question from another standpoint. We find it invariably the case in the world that nature herself has provided for all creatures, whether man or beast or bird or insect, just enough food for their sustenance. This is an eternal law of nature. In the kingdom of nature, none goes to sleep, none forgets to do his duty, and none shows a tendency to laziness. All the work is done to perfection and punctually to the minute. If we remember to order our life strictly in accordance with the immutable and eternal laws of nature, we shall find that there are no more deaths by starvation anywhere over the wide world. Since nature always provides just enough food to feed all created beings, it follows that he who takes to himself more than his normal share of food is depriving another of his legitimate share. Is it not a fact that in the kitchens of emperors and kings, of all rich men in general, much more food is prepared than is required to feed them and all their dependents? That is to say, they snatch so much food from the share of the poor. Is it, then, any wonder that the poor should die of starvation? If this is true, and this fact has been admitted by the most thoughtful men, it must necessarily follow that all the food that we eat beyond our immediate need is food filched from the stomachs of the poor. And to the extent to which we eat merely with a view to pleasing the palate, must our health necessarily suffer. All this preliminary discussion, we can proceed to consider what kind of food is best for us. Before, however, we decide the question of the ideal food for us, we have to consider what kinds of food are injurious to health and to be avoided. Under the term food, we include all the things that are taken into the body through the mouth, including wine, bhang, and opium, tobacco, tea, coffee and cocoa, spices and condiments. I am convinced that all these articles have to be completely eschewed, having been led to this conviction partly from my own experience and partly from the experience of others. Wine, bhang and opium have been condemned by all the religions of the world, although the number of total abstainers is so limited. Drink has brought about the ruin of whole families. The drunkard forfeits his sanity. He has even been known to forget the distinction between mother, wife, and daughter. His life becomes a mere burden to him. Even men of sound sense become helpless automations when they take to drink, even when not actually under its influence. Their minds are too impotent to do any work. Such people say that wine is harmless when used as medicine, but even European doctors have begun to give up this view in many cases. Some partisans of drink argue that if wine can be used as medicine with impunity, it can also be used as drink. But many poisons are employed as medicines. Do we ever dream of employing them as food? It is quite possible that in some diseases wine may do some good, but even then no sensible or thoughtful man should consent to use it even as medicine under any circumstances. As for opium, it is no less injurious than wine and is to be equally eschewed. Have we not seen a mighty nation like the Chinese falling under the deadly spell of opium and rendering itself incapable of maintaining its independence? Have we not seen the Jagirdars of our own land forfeiting their Jagirs under the same fatal influence? So powerful is the spell that has been woven over the minds of men by tobacco that it will take an age to break it. Young and old have equally come under this fatal spell. Even the best men do not shrink from the use of tobacco. Its use, indeed, has become a matter of course with us and is spreading wider and wider every day. Very few people are aware of the many tricks employed by the cigarette manufacturers to bring us more and more under its influence. They sprinkle opium or some perfumed acid on the tobacco so that we may find it all the more difficult to extricate ourselves from its clutches. They spend thousands of pounds in advertisements. Many European firms dealing in cigars keep their own presses, have their own cinemas, institute lotteries, and give away prizes and, in short, spend money like water to achieve their end. Even women have now begun to smoke, and poems have been composed on tobacco extolling it as the great friend of the poor. The evils of smoking are too numerous to mention. The habitual smoker becomes such a bond slave to it that he knows no sense of shame or compunction. He proceeds to emit the foul fumes even in the houses of strangers. It is also a matter of common experience that smokers are often tempted to commit all sorts of crimes. Children steal money from their parents' purses, and even the prisoners in gaols manage to steal cigarettes and keep them carefully concealed. The smoker will get on without food, but he cannot dispense with his smoke. Soldiers on the field of battle have been known to lose all capacity for fighting for failure of the indispensable cigarette at the critical moment. The late Count Leo Tolstoy of Russia tells us the following story. A certain man once took it into his head for some reason to murder his wife. He actually drew the knife and was about to do the deed, when he felt some compunction and gave it up. Then he sat down to smoke, and his wits being turned under the influence of tobacco, he rose once more and actually committed the murder. Tolstoy held the view that the poison of tobacco is more subtle and irresistible, and hence far more dangerous than that of wine. Then the money that is spent on cigars and cigarettes by individuals is frightfully large. I have myself come across instances of cigars consuming as much as ₹75 a month for one man. Smoking also leads to an appreciable reduction of digestive powers. The smoker feels no appetite for food, and in order to give it some flavor, spices and condiments have to be freely used. His breath stinks, and in some cases blisters are formed on his face, and the gums and teeth turn black in color. Many also fall a prey to terrible diseases. The fumes of tobacco befoul the air around, and public health suffers in consequence. I cannot understand how those who condemn drink can have the temerity to defend smoking. The man who does not eschew tobacco in all its forms can never be perfectly healthy, nor can he be a man of pure and blameless character. I must say that tea, coffee, and cocoa are equally injurious to health, although I know that very few are likely to agree with me. There is a kind of poison in all of them, and in the case of tea and coffee, if milk and sugar were not added, there would be absolutely no nutritious element in them. By means of repeated and varied experiments, it has been established that there is nothing at all in these articles which is capable of improving the blood. Until a few years ago, we used to drink tea and coffee only on special occasions. But today, they have become universally indispensable. Things have come to such a pass that even sickly persons often use them as substitutes for nourishing food. Fortunately for us, the costliness of cocoa has prevented its spread to the same extent as tea and coffee, although in the homes of the rich it is quite liberally used. That all these three articles are poisonous can be seen from the fact that those who once take to them can never afterwards get on without them. In the old days, I myself used to feel a distinct sense of weariness or languor if I did not get my tea punctually at the usual hour. Once some 400 women and children had gathered together at a certain celebration. The executive committee had resolved against providing tea to the visitors. The women, however, that had assembled there were in the habit of taking tea at 4 o'clock every evening. The authorities were informed that if these women were not given their usual tea, they would be too ill to move about, and needless to say, they had to cancel their original resolution. But some slight delay in the preparation of the tea led to a regular uproar, and the commotion subsided only after the women had had their cup of tea. I can vouch for the authenticity of this incident. In another instance, a certain woman had lost all her digestive powers under the influence of tea and had become a prey to chronic headaches. But from the moment that she gave up tea, her health began steadily to improve. A doctor of the Battersea municipality in England has declared, after careful investigation, that the brain tissues of thousands of women in his district have been diseased from excessive use of tea. I have myself come across many instances of health being ruined by tea. Coffee does some good against kapha, phlegm, and vata, wind, but at the same time it weakens the body by destroying the vital fluid and by making the blood as thin as water. To those people who advocate coffee on the ground that it is beneficial against phlegm and wind, we would recommend the juice of ginger as even better for the purpose. And on the other hand, let us remember that the evil effects of coffee are too serious to be counterbalanced by its good. When the blood and the vital fluid are poisoned by a stuff, can there be any hesitation in giving it up altogether? Cocoa is fully as harmful as coffee, and it contains a poison which deadens the perceptions of the skin. Those people who recognize the validity of moral considerations in these matters should remember that tea, coffee and cocoa are prepared mostly by laborers under indenture, which is only a fine name for slavery. If we saw with our own eyes the oppressive treatment that is meted out to the laborers in cocoa plantations, we should never again make use of the stuff. Indeed, if we inquire minutely into the methods of preparation of all our articles of food, we shall have to give up 90% of them. A harmless and healthy substitute for coffee, tea or cocoa can be prepared as follows. Even habitual coffee drinkers will be unable to perceive any difference in taste between coffee and this substitute. Good and well-sifted wheat is put into a frying pan over the fire and well fried until it has turned completely red and begun to grow dark in color. Then it is powdered just like coffee. A spoon of the powder is then put into a cup and boiling water poured onto it. Preferably keep the thing over the fire for a minute and add milk and sugar if necessary, and you get a delicious drink, which is much cheaper and healthier than coffee. Those who want to save themselves the trouble of preparing this powder may get their supply from the Satyagraha Ashram, Ahmedabad. From the point of view of diet, the whole mankind may be divided into three broad divisions. 1. The first class, which is the largest, consists of those who, whether by preference or out of necessity, live on an exclusive vegetable diet. Under this division come the best part of India, a large portion of Europe and China and Japan. The staple diet of the Italians is macaroni, of the Irish potato, of the Scotch oatmeal, and of the Chinese and Japanese rice. 2. The second class consists of those who live on a mixed diet. Under this class come most of the people of England, the richer classes of China and Japan, the richer Mussulmans of India, as well as those rich Hindus who have no religious scruples about taking meat. 3. To the third class belong the uncivilized peoples of the frigid zones who live on an exclusive meat diet. These are not very numerous, and they also introduce a vegetable element into their diet wherever they come in contact with the civilized races of Europe. Man then can live on three kinds of diet, but it is our duty to consider which of these is the healthiest for us. An examination of the structure of the human body leads to the conclusion that man is intended by nature to live on a vegetable diet. There is the closest affinity between the organs of the human body and those of the fruit-eating animals. The monkey, for instance, is so similar to man in shape and structure, and it is a fruit-eating animal. Its teeth and stomach are just like the teeth and stomach of man. From this we may infer that man is intended to live on roots and fruits and not on meat. Scientists have found out by experiments that fruits have in them all the elements that are required for man's sustenance. The plantain, the orange, the date, the grape, the apple, the almond, the walnut, the groundnut, the coconut, all these fruits contain a large percentage of nutritious elements. These scientists even hold that there is no need for man to cook his food. They argue that he should be able to subsist very well on food cooked by the sun's warmth, even as all the lower animals are able to do. And they say that the most nutritious elements in the food are destroyed in the process of cooking, and that those things cannot be eaten uncooked, could not have intended for our food by nature. If this view be correct, it follows that we are at present wasting a lot of our precious time in the cooking of our food. If we could live on uncooked food alone, we should be saving so much time and energy as well as money, all of which may be utilized for more useful purposes. Some people will doubtless say that it is idle and foolish to speculate on the possibility of men taking to uncooked food, since there is absolutely no hope of their ever doing it. But we are not considering at present what people will or will not do, but only what they ought to do. It is only when we know what the ideal kind of diet is that we shall be able more and more to approximate our actual to the ideal. When we say that our fruit diet is the best, we do not, of course, expect all men to take to it straight away. We only mean that if they should take to this diet, it would be the best thing for them. There are many men in England who have tried a pure fruit diet and who have recorded the results of their experience. They were people who took to this diet not out of religious scruples, but simply out of considerations of health. A German doctor has written a bulky volume on the subject and established the value of a fruit diet by many arguments and evidences. He has cured many diseases by a fruit diet combined with open-air life. He goes so far as to say that the people of any country can find all the elements of nutrition in the fruits of their own land. It may not be out of place to record my own experiences in this connection. For the last 6 months, I have been living exclusively on fruits, rejecting even milk and curd. My present dietary consists of plantain, groundnut and olive oil with some sour fruit like the lime. I cannot say that my experiment has been altogether a success, but a period of 6 months is all too short to arrive at any definite conclusions on such a vital matter as a complete change of diet. This, however, I can say that during this period I have been able to keep well where others have been attacked by disease, and my physical as well as mental powers are now greater than before. I may not be able to lift heavy loads, but I can now do hard labor for a much longer time without fatigue. I can also do more mental work and with better persistence and resoluteness. I have tried a fruit diet on many sickly people, invariably with great advantage. I shall describe these experiences in the section on diseases. Here I will only say that my own experience as well as my study of the subject has confirmed me on the conviction that a fruit diet is the best for us. As I have already confessed, I do not think for a moment that people will take to a fruit diet as soon as they read this. It may even be that all that I have written has no effect at all on the single reader, but I believe it to be my bounden duty to set down what I hold to be the right thing to the best of my light. If, however, anybody does wish to try a fruit diet, he should proceed rather cautiously in order to obtain the best results. He should carefully go through all the chapters of this book and fully grasp the fundamental principles before he proceeds to do anything in practice. My request to my readers is that they should reserve their final judgment until they have read through all that I have got to say. A vegetable diet is the best thing after a fruit diet. Under this term, we include all kinds of pot herbs and cereals as well as milk. Vegetables are not as nutritious as fruits since they lose part of their efficacy in the process of cooking. We cannot, however, eat uncooked vegetables. We will now proceed to consider which vegetables are the best for us. Wheat is the best of all the cereals. Man can live on wheat alone, for in it we have in due proportion all the elements of nutrition. Many kinds of edibles can be made of wheat, and they can all be easily digested. The ready-made foods for children that are sold by chemists are also made partly of wheat. Millet and maize belong to the same genus, and cakes and loaves can also be made out of them, but they are inferior to wheat in their food value. We will now consider the best form in which wheat may be taken. The white mill flour that is sold in our bazaars is quite useless. It contains no nutriment at all. An English doctor tells us that a dog which has fed solely on this flour died, while other dogs which were fed on better flour remained quite healthy. There is a great demand for loaves made of this flour, since men eat merely to satisfy their palate and are rarely moved by considerations of health. These loaves are devoid of taste and nutriment as well as softness. They become so hard that they cannot be broken by the hand. The best form of flour is that which is made of well-sifted wheat in the grind mill at home. This flour should be used without further sifting. Loaves made of it are quite sweet to the taste as well as quite soft. It also lasts for a longer time than the mill flour since it is far more nutritious and may be used in smaller quantities. The loaf sold in the bazaars is thoroughly useless. It may be quite white and attractive in appearance, but it is invariably adulterated. The worst of it is that it is made by fermentation. Many persons have testified from experience that fermented dough is harmful to health. Further, these loaves being made by besmearing the oven with fat, they are objectionable to Hindu as well as Muslim sentiment. To fill the stomach with these bazaar loaves instead of preparing good loaves at home is at best a sign of indolence. Another and an easier way of taking wheat is this. Wheat is ground into coarse grain, which is then well cooked and mixed with milk and sugar. This gives a very delicious and healthy kind of food. Rice is quite useless as a food. Indeed, it is doubtful if men can subsist upon mere rice to the exclusion of such nutritious articles as dal, ghee and milk. This is not the case with wheat, for man can retain his strength by living on mere wheat boiled in water. We eat the pot herbs mainly for their taste. As they have laxative powers, they help to purify the blood up to a limit. Yet they are but varieties of grass and very hard to digest. Those who partake too much of them have flabby bodies. They suffer very often from indigestion and go about in search of digestive pills and powders. Hence, if we take them at all, we should do so in moderation. All the many varieties of pulse are very heavy and hard for digestion. Their merit is that those who eat them do not suffer from hunger for a long time, but they also lead to indigestion in most cases. Those who do hard labor may be able to digest them and derive some good out of them. But we who lead a sedentary life should be very chary of eating them. Dr. Haig, a celebrated writer in England, tells us on the basis of repeated experiments that the pulses are injurious to health since they generate a kind of acid in the system which leads to several diseases and a premature old age. His arguments need not be given here, but my own experience goes to confirm his view. Those, however, who are unable or unwilling to eschew the pulses altogether should use them with great caution. Almost everywhere in India, the spices and condiments are freely used as nowhere else in the whole world. Even the African Negroes dislike the taste of a masala and refuse to eat food mixed with it. And if the whites eat masala, their stomach gets out of order and pimples also appear on their faces, as I have found from my own experience. The fact is that masala is by no means savory in itself, but we have so long been accustomed to its use that its flavor appeals to us. But as has been already explained, it is wrong to eat anything for its mere taste. How comes it then that masala is so freely eaten by us? Admittedly, in order to help the digestion and to be able to eat more. Pepper, mustard, coriander and other condiments have the power of artificially helping the digestion and generating a sort of artificial hunger. But it would be wrong to infer from this that all the food has been thoroughly digested and assimilated into the system. Those who take too much of masala are often found to suffer from anemia and even from diarrhea. I know a man who even died in the prime of youth out of too much eating of pepper. Hence it is quite necessary to eschew all condiments altogether. What has been said of masala applies also to salt. Most people would be scandalized at this suggestion, but it is a fact established by experience. There is a school in England who even hold the view that salt is more harmful than most condiments. As there is enough of salt in the composition of vegetables we use, we need not put any extra salt into them. Nature herself has provided just as much as salt as is required for the upkeep of our health. All the extra salt that we use is quite superfluous. All of it goes out of the body again in the form of perspiration or in other ways, and no portion of it seems to have any useful function to perform in the body. One writer even holds that salt poisons the blood. He says that those who use no salt at all have their blood so pure that they are not affected even by snake bite. We do not know if this is a fact or not, but this much we know from experience that in several diseases like piles and asthma, the disuse of salt at once produces appreciably beneficial results. And on the other hand, I have not come across a single instance of a man being any the worse for not using salt. I myself left off the use of salt 2 years ago, and I have not only not suffered by it, but have even been benefited in some respects. I have not now to drink as much water as before, and I am more brisk and energetic. The reason for my disuse of salt was a very strange one. for it was occasioned by the illness of somebody else. The person whose illness led to it did not get worse after that, but remained in the same condition, and it is my faith that if only the deceased person himself had given up the use of salt, he would have recovered completely. Those who give up salt will also have to give up vegetables and dal. This is a very hard thing to do, as I have found from many tests. I am convinced that vegetables and dal cannot be properly digested without salt. This does not, of course, mean that salt improves the digestion, but it only appears to do so, just as pepper does, although ultimately it leads to evil consequences. Of course, the man who entirely gives up the use of salt may feel out of sorts for a few days, but if he keeps up his spirits, he is bound to be immensely benefited in the long run. I make bold to regard even milk as one of the articles to be eschewed. This I do on the strength of my own experience, which, however, need not be described here in detail. The popular idea of the value of milk is a pure superstition, but it is also deep-rooted that it is futile to think of removing it. As I have said more than once, I do not cherish the hope that my readers will accept all my views. I do not even believe that all those who accept them in theory will adopt them in practice. Nevertheless, I think it is my duty to speak out what I believe to be the truth, leaving my readers to form their own judgments. Many doctors hold the view that milk gives rise to a kind of fever, and many books have been written in support of this view. The disease-bearing germs that live in the air rapidly gain an entrance into the milk and render it poisonous, so that it is very difficult to keep milk in a state of perfect purity. In Africa, elaborate rules have been laid down for the conduct of the dairies, saying how the milk should be boiled and preserved, how the vessels should be kept clean, and so on. When so much pains have to be taken in this matter, it is certainly to be considered how far it is worthwhile to employ milk as an article of food. Moreover, the purity or otherwise of the milk depends upon the cow's food and the state of its health. Doctors have testified to the fact that those who drink the milk of consumptive cows fall a prey to consumption themselves. It is very rare to come across a cow that is perfectly healthy. That is to say, perfectly pure milk is very hard to obtain, since it is tainted at its very source. Everybody knows that a child that sucks the breast of its mother contracts any disease that she might be suffering from. And often when a little child is ill, medicines is administered to its mother so that its effect might reach the child through the milk of her breast. Just in the same way, the health of the man who drinks the milk of a cow will be the same as that of the cow itself. When the use of milk is fraught with so much danger, would it not be the part of wisdom to eschew it altogether? Especially when there are excellent substitutes. Olive oil, for instance, serves the purpose to some extent, and sweet almond is a most efficient substitute. The almond is first soaked in hot water and its husk removed. Then it is well crushed and mixed thoroughly well with water. This gives a drink which contains all the good properties of milk and is at the same time free from its evil effects. Now let us consider the question from the point of view of natural law. The calf drinks its mother's milk only until its teeth have grown, and it begins to eat as soon as it has its teeth. Clearly, that is also what man is intended to do. Nature does not intend us to go on drinking milk after we have ceased to be infants. We should learn to live on fruits like the apple and the almond, or on wheat roti after we have our teeth. Although this is not the place to consider the saving in money that might be effected by giving up milk, it is certainly a point to be kept in mind. Nor is there any need for any of the articles produced from milk. The sourness of lime is quite a good substitute for that of buttermilk, and as for ghee, thousands of Indians manage with oil even now. A careful examination of the structure of the human body shows that meat is not the natural food of man. Dr. Haig and Dr. Kingsford have very clearly demonstrated the evil effects of meat on the body of man. They have shown that meat generates just the same kind of acid in the body as the pulses. It leads to the decay of the teeth as well as to rheumatism. It also gives rise to evil passions like anger, which, as we have already seen, are but forms of disease. To sum up then, we find that those who live on fruits alone are very rare, but it is quite easy to live on combination of fruits, wheat and olive oil, and it is also eminently conducive to sound health. The plantain comes easy first among the fruits, but the date, the grape, the plum and the orange, to name only a few, are all quite nourishing and may be taken along with the roti. The roti does not suffer in taste by being besmeared with olive oil. This diet dispenses with salt, pepper, milk and sugar and is quite simple and cheap. It is of course foolish to eat sugar for its own sake. Too much sweet meat weakens the teeth and injures the health. Excellent edibles can be made of wheat and the fruits, and a combination of health and taste secured. The next question to consider is how much food shall be taken and how many times a day, but as this is a subject of vital importance, we will devote a separate chapter to it. End of Chapter 5. Part 1, Chapter 6 of A Guide to Health. How much and how many times should we eat? There is a great divergence of opinion among doctors as to the quantity of food that we should take. One doctor holds that we should eat to the utmost of our capacity, and he has calculated the quantities of different kinds of food that we can take. Another holds the view that the food of laborers should differ in quantity as well as in quality from that of persons engaged in mental work, while a third doctor contends that the prince and the peasant should eat exactly the same quantity of food. This much, however, will be generally admitted, that the weak cannot eat just as much as the strong. In the same way, a woman eats less than a man, and children and old men eat less than young men. One writer goes so far as to say that if only we could masticate our food thoroughly well, so that every particle of it is mixed with the saliva, then we should not have to eat more than 5 or 10 tolas of food. This he says on the basis of numberless experiments, and his book has been sold in thousands. All this shows that it is futile to think of prescribing the quantity of food for men. Most doctors admit that 99% of human beings eat more than is needed.
Indeed, this is a fact of everyday experience and does not require to be proclaimed by any doctor.
There is no fear at all men ruining their health by eating too little, and the great need is for a reduction in the quantity of food that we generally take. As said above, it is of the utmost importance to masticate the food thoroughly well. By so doing, we shall be able to extract the maximum of nutriment from the minimum of food. Experienced persons point out that the feces of a man whose food is wholesome and who does not eat too much will be small in quantity, quite solid and smooth, dark in color, and free from all foul smell. The man who does not have such feces should understand that he has eaten too much of unwholesome food and has failed to masticate it well. Also, if a man does not get sleep at night, or if his sleep be troubled by dreams, and if his tongue be dirty in the morning, he should know that he has been guilty of excessive eating. And if he has to get up several times at night to make water, it means that he has taken too much liquid food at night. By these and other tests, every man can arrive at the exact quantity of food that is needed for him. Many men suffer from foul breath, which shows that their food has not been well digested. In many cases, again, too much eating gives rise to pimples on the face and in the nose, and many people suffer from wind in the stomach. The root of all these troubles is, to put it plainly, that we have converted our stomach into a latrine, and we carry this latrine about with us. When we consider the matter in a sober light, we cannot help feeling an unmixed contempt for ourselves. If we want to avoid the sin of overeating, we should take a vow never to have anything to do with feasts of all kinds. Of course, we should feed those who come to us as guests, but only so as not to violate the laws of health. Do we ever think of inviting our friends to clean their teeth with us or to take a glass of water? Is not eating as strictly a matter of health as these things? Why then should we make so much fuss about it? We have become such gluttons by habit that our tongues are ever craving for abnormal sensations. Hence we think it is a sacred duty to cram our guests with rich food, and we cherish the hope that they will do likewise for us when their turn comes. If an hour after eating we ask a clean-bodied friend to smell our mouth, and if he should tell us his exact feelings, we should have to hide our heads in utter shame.
But some people are so shameless that they take purgatives soon after eating, that they might be able to eat still more, or they even vomit out what they have eaten in order to sit down again to the feast at once. Since even the best of us are more or less guilty of overeating, our wise forefathers have prescribed frequent fasts as a religious duty. Indeed, merely from the point of view of health, it will be highly beneficial to fast at least once a fortnight. Many pious Hindus take only one meal a day during the rainy season. This is a practice based upon the soundest hygienic principles. For when the air is damp and the sky cloudy, the digestive organs are weaker than usual, and hence there should be a reduction in the quantity of food. And now we will consider how many meals we may take in the day. Numberless people in India are content with only 2 meals. Those who do hard labor take 3 meals, but a system of 4 meals has arisen after the invention of English medicines. Of late, several societies have been formed in England and in America in order to exhort the people to take only 2 meals a day. They say that we should not take a breakfast early in the morning, since our sleep itself serves the purpose of the breakfast. As soon as we get up in the morning, we should prepare to work rather than to eat. We should take our meal only after working for 3 hours. Those who hold these views take only 2 meals a day and do not even take tea in the interval. An experienced doctor by name Deve has written an excellent book on fasting in which he has shown the benefits of dispensing with the breakfast. I can also say from my experience that there is absolutely no need to eat more than twice for a man who has passed the period of youth and whose body has attained its fullest growth. End of Chapter 6. Part 1, Chapter 7 of A Guide to Health. Exercise. Exercise is as much of a vital necessity for man as air, water and food, in the sense that no man who does not take exercise regularly can be perfectly healthy. By exercise, we do not mean merely walking or games like hockey, football and cricket. We include under the term all physical and mental activity. Exercise, even as food, is an essential to the mind as to the body. The mind is much weakened by want of exercise as the body, and a feeble mind is indeed a form of disease. An athlete, for instance, who is an expert in wrestling cannot be regarded as a really healthy man unless his mind is equally efficient. As already explained, a sound mind in a sound body alone constitutes true health. Which then are those exercises which keep the body and the mind equally efficient? Indeed, nature has so arranged it that we can be engaged in physical as well as mental work at the same time. The vast majority of men on earth live by field labor. The farmer has to do strenuous bodily exercise at any cost, for he has to work for 8 or 10 hours or sometimes even more in order to earn his bread and clothing. And efficient labor is impossible unless the mind is also in good condition. He has to attend to all the many details of cultivation. He must have a good knowledge of soils and seasons, and perhaps also of the movements of the sun, the moon and the stars. Even the ablest men will be beaten by the farmer in these matters. He knows the state of his immediate surroundings thoroughly well. He can find the directions by looking at the stars in the night and tell a great many things from the ways of birds and beasts. He knows, for instance, that rain is about to fall when a particular class of birds gather together and begin to make noise. He knows as much of the earth and the sky as is necessary for his work. As he has to bring up his children, he must know something of Dharma Shastra. Since he lives under the broad open sky, he easily realizes the greatness of God. Of course, all men cannot be farmers, nor is this book written for them. We have, however, described the life of the farmer as we are convinced that is the natural life for man. To the extent to which we deviate from these natural conditions must we suffer in health. From the farmer's life, we learn that we should work for at least 8 hours a day, and it should involve mental work as well. Merchants and others leading a sedentary life have indeed to do some mental work, but their work is too one-sided and too inadequate to be called exercise. For such people, the wise men of the West have devised games like cricket and football, and such minor games as are played at parties and festive gatherings. As for mental work, the reading of such books as involve no mental strain is prescribed. No doubt these games do give exercise to the body, but it is a question if they are equally beneficial to the mind. How many of the best players of football and cricket are men of superior mental powers? What have we seen of the mental equipment of those Indian princes who have earned a distinction as players? On the other hand, how many of the ablest men care to play these games? We can affirm from our experience that there are very few players among those who are gifted with great mental powers. The people of England are extremely fond of games, but their own poet Kipling speaks very disparagingly of the mental capacity of the players. Here in India, however, we have chosen quite a different path. Our men do arduous mental work, but give little or no exercise to the body. Their bodies are enfeebled by excessive mental strain, and they fall a prey to serious diseases, and just when the world expects to benefit by their work, they bid it eternal farewell. Our work should be neither exclusively physical nor exclusively mental, nor such as ministers merely to the pleasure of the moment. The ideal kind of exercise is that which gives vigor to the body as well as to the mind. Only such exercise can keep a man truly healthy, and such a man is the farmer. But what shall he do who is no farmer? The exercise which games like the cricket give is too inadequate, and something else has to be devised. The best thing for ordinary men would be to keep a small garden near the house and work in it for a few hours every day. Some may ask, what can we do if the house we live in be not our own? This is a foolish question to ask, for whoever may be the owner of the house, he cannot object to his ground being improved by digging and cultivation. And we shall have the satisfaction of feeling that we have helped to keep somebody else's ground neat and clean. Those who do not find time for such exercise, or who may not like it, may resort to walking. which is the next best exercise. Truly has this been described as the queen of all exercises. The main reason why our sadhus and fakirs are strong as a class is that they go about from one of the country to the other only on foot. Thoreau, the great American writer, has said many remarkable things on walking as an exercise. He says that the writings of those who keep indoors and never go out into the open air will be as weak as their bodies. Referring to his own experience, he says that all his best works were written when he was walking the most. He was such an invertebrate walker that 4 or 5 hours a day was quite an ordinary thing for him. Our passion for exercise should become so strong that we cannot bring ourselves to dispense with it on any account. We hardly realize how weak and futile is our mental work when accompanied by hard physical exercise. Walking gives movement to every portion of the body and ensures vigorous circulation of the blood, for when we walk fast, fresh air is inhaled into the lungs. Then there is the inestimable joy that natural objects give us, the joy that comes from a contemplation of the beauties of nature. It is of course useless to walk along the lanes and streets or to take the same path every day. We should go out into the fields and forests where we can have a taste of nature. Walking a mile or two is no walking at all. At least 10 or 12 miles are necessary for exercise. Those who cannot walk so much every day can at least do so on Sundays. Once a man who was suffering from indigestion went to the doctor to take medicine. He was advised to walk a little every day, but he pleaded that he was too weak to walk at all. Then the doctor took him into his carriage for a drive. On the way he deliberately dropped his whip, and the sick man out of courtesy got down to take it. The doctor, however, drove on without waiting for him, and the poor man had to trudge behind the carriage. When the doctor was satisfied that he had walked long enough, he took him into the carriage again and explained that it was a device adopted to make him walk. As the man had begun to feel hungry by this time, he realized the value of the doctor's advice and forgot the affair of the whip. He then went home and had a hearty meal. Let those who are suffering from digestion and kindred diseases try for themselves, and they will at once realize the value of walking as an exercise. End of Chapter 7. Part 1, Chapter 8 of A Guide to Health. Dress. Dress is also a matter of health to a certain extent. European ladies, for instance, have such queer notions of beauty that their dress is contrived with a view to straightening the waist and the feet, which in its turn leads to several diseases. The feet of Chinese women are deliberately straightened to such an extent that they are smaller even than the feet of our little children, and as a result their health is injured. These two instances show how the health may be affected by the nature of the dress. But the choice of our dress does not rest always in our hands, for we have perforce to adopt the manners of our elders. The chief object of dress has been forgotten, and it has come to be regarded as indicative of a man's religion, country, race, and profession. In this state of things, it is very difficult to discuss the question of dress strictly from the point of view of health, but such a discussion must necessarily do us good. Under the term dress, we include all such things as boots and shoes, as well as jewelry and the like. What is the chief object of dress? Man in his primitive state had no dress at all. He went about naked and exposing almost the whole body. His skin was firm and strong, he was able to stand sun and shower, and never once suffered from cold or kindred ailments. As has already been explained, we inhale the air not only through the nostrils but also through the numberless pores of the skin. So when we cover the body with clothing, we are preventing this natural function of the skin. But when the people of the colder countries grew more and more indolent, they began to feel the need to cover their bodies. They were no longer able to stand the cold, and the use of the dress came into being, until at length it came to be looked upon not merely as a necessity, but as an ornament. Subsequently, it has also come to be regarded as an indication of country, race, etc. In fact, nature herself has provided an excellent covering for us in our skin. The idea that the body looks unseemly in undress is absurd, for the very best pictures are those that display the naked body. When we cover up the most ordinary parts of our body, it is as though we felt ashamed of them in their natural condition, and as though we found fault with nature's own arrangement. We think it a duty to go on multiplying the trappings and ornaments for our body as we grow richer and richer. We adorn our body in all resorts of hideous ways and pride ourselves on our handsomeness. In our eyes were not blinded by foolish habit, we should see that the body looks most handsome only in its nakedness, as it enjoys its best health only in that condition. Dress indeed detracts from the natural beauty of the body. But not content with dress alone, man began to wear jewels also. This is mere madness, for it is hard to understand how these jewels can add an iota to the body's natural beauty. But women have gone beyond all bounds of sense or decency in this matter. They are not ashamed to wear anklets which are so heavy that they can hardly lift their feet, or to pierce their nose and ears hideously for putting on rings, or to stud their wrists and fingers with rings and bracelets of several kinds. These ornaments only serve to help the accumulation of dirt in the body. There is indeed no limit to the dirt on the nose and ears. We mistake this filthiness for beauty and throw money away to secure it, and we do not even shrink from putting our lives at the mercy of thieves. There is no limit to the pains we take to satisfy the silly notions of vanity that we have so sedulously cultivated. Women indeed have become so infatuated that they are not prepared to remove the earring even if the ears are diseased. Even if the hand is swollen and suffering from frightful pain, they would not remove the bracelets, and they are unwilling to remove the ring from a swollen finger, since they imagine that their beauty would suffer by so doing. A thorough reform in dress is by no means an easy matter, but it is surely possible for all of us to renounce our jewels and all superfluous clothing. We may keep some few things for the sake of convention and throw off all the rest. Those who are free from the superstition that the dress is an ornament can surely effect many changes in their dress and keep themselves in good health. Nowadays, the notion has gained ground that European dress is necessary for maintaining our decency and prestige. This is not the place to discuss this question in detail. Here, it will be enough to point out that, although the dress of Europeans might be good enough for the cold countries of Europe, it is hopelessly unsuited to India. Indian dress alone can be good for Indians, whether they be Hindu or Mussulman. Our dress being loose and open, air is not shut out, and being white, for the most part, it does not absorb the heat. Black dress feels hot since all the sun's rays are absorbed into it and in its turn into the body. The practice of covering the head with the turban has become quite common with us. Nevertheless, we should try to keep the head bare as far as possible. To grow the hair and to dress it by combing and brushing, parting in the middle and so on, is nothing short of barbarous. Dust and dirt as well as nits and lice accumulate in the hair, and if a boil were to arise in the head, it cannot be properly treated. Especially for those who use a turban, it would be stupid to grow the hair. The feet also are common agents of disease. The feet of those who wear boots and shoes grow dirty and begin to exude a lot of stinking perspiration. So great is the stink that those who are sensitive to smells will hardly be able to stand by the side of one who is removing his shoes and socks. Our common names for the shoes speak of it as the protector of the feet and the enemy of the thorn, showing that shoes should be worn only when we have to walk along a thorny path or over very cold or hot ground, and that only the soles should be covered and not the entire feet. And this purpose is served excellently well by the sandal. Some people who are accustomed to the use of shoes often suffer from headaches, of pain in the feet, or weakness of the body. Let them try the experiment of walking with bare feet, and then they will at once find out the benefit of keeping the feet bare and free from sweat by exposure to the air. End of dress.